get this underway. It's 6 o'clock.
Issue on the room.
So, Jan, we good, Nick? All right, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Hartford Select Board on Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024 at 6 p.m. The first item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If anyone likes to join, to lead us. All right. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thanks very much. Next item, order of agenda. I don't think we have any changes. So we will go to public comments. We'll start with people in the room. Well, is Lanny online? Can you just check?
I think so. I'll double check. See him online.
Okay. We'll start with public comment. We'll start in the room, and then we'll hear from people joining us on Zoom. Any public comment in the room? Okay. Seeing none, how about Zoom? Any hands up?
No hands up at the moment.
Okay, no hands up on the Zoom either, so we will kick this off. And we're going to get the IT budget presentation. So we have Dylan here to lead us through that. So Dylan, whenever you're ready, take it away.
All right. All right. Working through this, we wanted to put this slide up first. Just some small corrections. I think some people have seen just from healthcare and contracted services. So wanted to put all those numbers kind of up front to kind of know the accurate numbers before we get into the weeds on everything here. We have a new person in my department, and part of that came with kind of a small reimagining with HR in terms of job responsibilities and, thinking of the future of the department. So that person's now a help desk technician, which is part of why you see some wage changes in healthcare and retirement, things like that. I wanted to put this slide up as there's some new folks on the board, just to give a general idea of what IT does. Kind of spans a few different departments. Biggest thing is infrastructure, project management as new servers come online, kind of town-wide initiatives, kind of overseeing that from the beginning to the end. Big part of that is also technical support for the internal staff. We have some reporting that we run. So over the course of the year, we have a little under 1,200 tickets that we've opened and closed since creation of this. That's number has since increased. And then a big thing is security, and it kind of spans cybersecurity, through our network, as well as physical security, all of our cameras, door controls, things of that nature. And then that also includes access to internal systems, MuniSmart financial system, Laserfiche documentation system, and various other things. So we do a lot of auditing to make sure as time goes on, the folks who need access to what they need have it, and those who don't need access to certain things don't have access to it. And for the public safety side of things, that's focused heavily on CJIS, which is Criminal Justice and Information Systems. It's the compliance that that building gets audited on every once in a while. And that's kind of the angle that the lens I look through everything on. This is a similar slide I've had in a lot of areas. The bulk of my presentation is going to be on some of the bigger items, which I'll touch on in a moment. I'll just mention here that we've added some things to the website, and we're proposing that again for next year. One of which is Audio Eye, which is a compliance for accessibility, folks who have trouble listening or watching on the website. And then we have a social media archiving tool that we're in the middle of setting up, just to, for legal reasons, archiving posts that we make online, interactions that we have. And the biggest reason for that is we don't have access from the Facebook side of things. So if, interactions happen that get deleted, we have no way of retaining that. So this would allow us to kind of keep that and expand our footprint with the website. The last two items on the bottom are going to be on the upcoming slide here, as well as the dark trace amount as well. This slide here is a consulting company that I work closely with. They do everything from servers to 911 system to management of the network, future proofing, things of that nature. And the consulting for the big project I'm proposing would be it would be encompassed in this amount. So that's why I'm proposing a $5,000 increase to cover kind of that new item. Dark trace is the next slide here. This is kind of an all-encompassing security solution that we've been partners with for 5 years now. It started with what they call an IPS IDS device, and essentially that kind of watches the network 24/7 as we don't have the staffing to do so, and alerts us to anomalies that we see that we investigate, and there's a team that helps us do so. The analogy, as I've written here, is if your antivirus is sort of a no entry list, dark trace is the guard at your building kind of checking IDs. So it's kind of the next evolution of what antivirus really is. And since 2019, we've added more and more things. We've added an email filter, which I can't even begin to describe how many times that's caught all sorts of phishing attacks and various other things that don't even reach the inboxes of people on email, which has been great. And we've added some attack surface management, which is penetration testing. And a lot of times folks go out and get all these services from all these different companies. Dark Trace kind of does it all in one. We are at the end of our contract, and so we're currently discussing what renewals would look like. The amount I was told is $80,000, and so I would be coming to the board next year to discuss, re-entering potentially with an RFP. But I wanted to put this amount in the budget so we have an idea of kind of what we're expecting next summer when this contract was going to expire. This next item is something heavily on the public safety side. This is formerly known as NetMotion, currently called Absolute Secure Access. It is a VPN. For folks who don't use VPNs, it allows you to make a secure connection to a server or usually work related. And without getting too in the weeds, the proprietary nature of this is it allows what they call persistence. And this is used heavily in public safety as ambulances and various other patrol vehicles respond to calls. They have a Verizon connection that as you get through dead spots, the connection can drop, and this software will keep the connection and reestablish it once you get cell coverage again. It's a very powerful tool. And so my proposal, we house this internally, and all of my time is really kept with the infrastructure, so the server that kind of makes this system run, and we're really not utilizing it to its fullest potential. And so my proposal would be to offload the responsibility of hosting the software on us onto the vendor, and that would allow us to really hone in on what this software can do. Some of the examples on the bottom include sort of breadcrumb trails for when there's connection issues, if there's ever a public safety responder safety issue, we can help pinpoint locations. And also helps sandbox suspicious links and really just kind of stay connected 24/7, things I just don't have the time to really configure at the moment, and this would free up my time to be able to do so. This next part is going to get a little technical, so I'm going to try and keip it as high level.
As opposed to the stuff we just heard.
So I have to kind of describe for people don't really deal with computers and servers, kind of what I'm describing here. And the idea of a server is you have a server, which I think about as a PC that has a lot of horsepower, for lack of a better phrase. You have a lot of RAM, you have a lot of CPUs, and really what that does is that allows you to run what's called virtual machines. And the idea behind that is you have, I think of it essentially, segmented use cases. So you have a virtual machine for your file server, you have a virtual machine for your VPN connection server. And the idea is that by segmenting the roles, you can be very granular with permissions, and you can be very specific about, okay, our file server needs a lot more resources than our VPN server, for example. And so for a lot of businesses, including Town Hall, we have one server that has multiple virtual machines. And virtual machines really, without getting too in the weeds, it's essentially you're virtualizing the computer within the computer, which is very inception-y. But the problem with that is you have these two IT terms at the bottom here, RTO and RPO, which essentially says, if there's an outage, how much data can you stand to lose, or how much time can you stand to lose before you're back up and running? Public safety, the building has a much different RTO and RPO than Town Hall. And so years ago, we discussed the fact that if we have one big server that houses everything that we do, 911 system, radio things, response plans, if that one server has an issue, it would be fairly catastrophic until we get the resources we need. So the idea is that whatever your response requirements are, you should have the resources to house that. So what we have done is what we've used, the technical term is a two-host cluster with shared storage. And what does that mean? That means you have a shared storage device that houses all of your data that can be sort of accessed from multiple servers at once. Now, there's a lot that goes in this. There's fiber cables and virtualization software, but it has allowed us to have a 99% uptime since 2019. And what that means is when server A needs maintenance, we can move everything just to host B, take down host A, do our maintenance, or if there's an issue, take it down, and then move everything back afterwards. That's the company that I work with helps maintain this with me. It's, as you can imagine, a lot goes into it. And the whole proposal for this project is the fact that shared storage device, we've sort of outgrown the amount of data we can hold. And part of that is for numerous reasons. The 911 system is a very big part of what we do. That has grown as we've brought in outside agencies, Windsor, South Royalton, Norwich, all access that 911 system. We've housed the fire alarm system got moved to there. We are expanding the police evidence. So all of the evidence that used to be shared on external hard drives, we're going to now be ingesting into the system. So my proposal here is just sort of seeing the future and how this has kind of accelerated the timeline in my eyes. And coupled with how the budget has laid out, I thought this would be an opportunity to kind of get ahead of the situation here. Part of that is we have another infrastructure project coming in 2 to 3 years, not as much as what you see here, but our network switches are up for renewal, and we're at the point of looking at replacement as we did a few years ago. So my concern with pushing things would be that you would have two infrastructure projects kind of bumping into each other, and it could be a fairly big impact on the budget. So my proposal, as you see here, with the support of public safety, as I've worked with them closely on this, the total cost of the project is $151,412. $24,997 of that is licensing. And I wanted to be clear about the licensing in the sense that we use this licensing currently. So this wouldn't be an upgrade from what we have. It would price lock it for 5 years. part of the reason for that is the virtualization software. Again, if you Google Broadcom VMware acquisition, you could read all about it. But essentially, there's some uncertainty about the acquisition of Broadcom as the price has gone up. And I have been told by numerous people that it could go up even higher than what it is currently. So part of the two birds, one stone is I wanted to try and lock in the prices if we were going to do such a upgrade that we have proposed here. So that is part of it, but that is also software that we use today. And then the 24,691.20 would be part of the managed services line item that I referenced previously, part of that 75,000 that is in that proposed line item. All of that removed from the total brings the hardware cost to 101,723. That would be replacing one of the servers and the shared storage device, which in this equation is sort of like the engine in the car that makes everything run. And to help mitigate the costs for PD and fire and dispatch, I wanted to contribute money from my reserve account that would bring the total down to 81,000, split 3 ways for 27,000 each. Is the best way that I've found working with everyone that this would have the least amount of impact, but also future-proof us for quite a long time at this point. And this slide here is simply just a chart kind of breaking down the amount from every department involved, the licensing and deployment, which would be on me, as well as the reserve amount, and then the 27,000 from the other 3 departments. And then that was quite a lot, I know, so happy to answer questions.
Questions for Dylan? Okay.
You really did translate that much better than I could absorb by just reading it. Will you stop sharing your screen?
Absolutely.
I think you answered a couple of my questions while you were speaking. Do any of the IT salaries get distributed through other departments, or no? I mean, I guess I know we have examples of doing that with some staff, and I mean, clearly you're supporting the town in general, but also, anyway, I'm not very sure if that's a model that should be applicable more across the board, including the enterprise funds, something to consider. But I guess that was the other thing. So there was the other similar question with things like dark trace. Is that something, like, for me, honestly, like looking at the budget, it's kind of easier to see what the total cost is of a program or application. So all of the dark trace expense is in the IT budget right now, even though it serves all departments through the town. Okay. Again, just something to consider, I guess, holistically. I don't know that we need to change. I mean, I think it would be great to be consistent with that type of budgeting in terms of like either, like Muni Smart, like should that all just be in the finance department or spread out among departments? Dark trace, so like, we have the sustainability coordinator and the communication specialists that are spread through enterprise funds and stuff as well. So anyway, I'm just kind of throwing that out there as we're approaching wrap up. And then I think you did answer, so you do have the reserves for the network switches project that's going forward. It references in your reserve document that upgrade for town hall and public safety starting fiscal 27. So are you suggesting the reserve starts in fiscal 27 or the purchase?
The purchase. It's been between town hall and public safety. They were not all bought at the same time. So I think public safety is coming up quicker. So we're currently discussing that, whether it makes sense to keep the same timeline, or if we're going to do it all to keep it all on one schedule, what would that look like? But it's in the early stages at the moment.
So with, in the IT reserves, there's 59,193.
Mhm.
And so you're looking at applying about 20,000 of that for fiscal year 26.
Yep.
And then potentially about 40,000 for fiscal 27. Are we looking to put more money into that reserve account?
I believe I have 20,000 in this year's
Okay.
budget as well. Yep.
Okay, I think that, oh, you know what, can we, I do have one more question, just relating to the security around sensitive data. I think it was on your, like, just in terms of like the identity and access management part of your position. This kind of ties in with a question I had asked as a follow-up about like HR and employment documentation, how secure it is. And there was a small amount budgeted for digitization of employee documentation. And I'm just trying to get my head around how the security of that kind of information is protected. Not, just give me an overview.
Sure. My understanding is there's a lock cabinet that I don't even have access to.
physical lock.
Yep. We are, I won't speak for the HR director, but we are discussing trying to utilize a product we already have to accomplish kind of some of what you're talking about maybe digitizing, but also keeping it, secure as well. We haven't spoken to her in a while about that, but that's something that is kind of on our radar.
Thanks.
Other questions for Dylan? Lenny?
First off, Dylan, my apologies for coming in late. Had a detour on an accident. So what are the ramifications of not doing this proposal?
If we, it's sort of, trying to extrapolate into the future, but if the trends are moving how they're moving, we could see worst case of running out of space and having to make some hard decisions about, what we're keeping, what we're not keeping. And we have compliance around data we have to keep for a certain amount of time. We've seen performance issues, let's say, with the 911 system. The current system, half of it is spinning disk hard drives, which are cheaper but less performance, and half are solid state. So the storage that your phone has, for example, which is more expensive but better performance. And we have essentially outgrown the faster performance. So as we move into the slower performance, we've seen some issues with the 911 system that we've mitigated on the software side by doing a migration from the software. But it was clear, while we're in a good place now, it was clear that essentially will not help nearly as much if we're kind of in the same position, this time next year. So my concern was that if we don't do this, then we won't be able to, mitigate the performance issues that probably will come around.
When you say performance issues, we're still able to provide the service to the town, the same service, but not as swiftly as what you're getting.
Exactly. We noticed it probably a year ago. And so I knew the software migration was going to be helpful. And so in terms of the issues, it lasted probably 3 or 4 days. And it was never, there was no outages, there was nothing catastrophic, but we noticed some, the amount of time a screen would load and various quirks that we work very closely with dispatch, who are kind of experts on running the program. And we were able to mitigate it very quickly, especially with support from Motorola. But the conversation quickly turned to, the underlying reason is because we are essentially filling up our storage in our current device.
So the other question is, in terms of cybersecurity concerns, are we adequately protected with the current cybersecurity software that we have?
My approach has always been what they call defense in depth, so not necessarily leaning on one appliance or another. So we have an antivirus that is very, very good, but I didn't want to solely lean on that. And so our dark trace appliance fills in a lot of those gaps, as well as our, internal controls from the phishing links side of things. But as I mentioned, dark trace is, we started very small with the relationship, but it has grown in a very good way to encompass everything from penetration testing. So we have folks help identify holes in our network that we close very quickly to, phishing tests, ransomware investigations, that we have a whole team. There's a whole 24/7 SOC or security operations center that we have access to that we can get help with, investigate things on, and I feel very secure about it.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any way you can do projections at the current rate that we're filling up our storage. Do you have any projections how soon we will be out of space?
I could surely run those for you. I don't have them currently with me. We're not, it's not going to be tomorrow, but it sort of everyone who helps, from the consultants to Motorola, our vendor, to other folks, really have kind of circled back to just the device itself. And besides the fact that the shelf life for those devices is between 5 to 7 years, and I think we're approaching year 6 from my understanding.
So this is something that, so most of this could be put off until another year if we had to, without crippling us.
I would say it's sort of rolling the dice. It's kind of hard to tell. It came up on our radar enough that I wanted to make it the biggest part of my presentation. So it's hard to say, but that would not be my sort of recommendation.
Of course not. Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Bill? Mary?
Yeah, I don't understand a lot of this, but back to the shared storage. So what you're proposing is an upgrade.
So you have 3, if you remember the diagram, we have host A, host B,
right,
and the shared storage. Host B and the shared storage would be replaced. And part of the other cost would be licensing to make it all run, which again, as I mentioned, we currently use. It would price lock it for 5 years. And the rest would be consulting that would help me kind of install everything without any downtime and get it all up and running and tested.
When things are in storage, are they on the cloud? Or, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, how do you protect the shared storage?
So the reason it's called shared storage is that essentially it's accessed by devices in our building. We do not put a lot in the cloud just because of the nature of a lot of the data that we house. And if we do, there's a vetting process for multiple folks to make sure we're compliant with what we're storing in the cloud. But the majority of what we have is local on site.
So shared internally. Not
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
Questions for Bill?
Sure. Thank you. I was just wondering, I noticed that you're proposing to upgrade the VPN to this, is it software as a service?
Exactly. Yep.
And so to me, that says that currently we're like running our own VPN more or less.
We're running the same software, except for if you think of, it's called the OSI layer, but you have software at the highest level, and then all below you have networking, the physical infrastructure it lives on, the physical cables, all of that. We have to manage all of it. So it's just sort of a time management where it would free up by having essentially the same vendor manage everything below the software. It lets us really use kind of what the software is made to do. It's a very powerful piece of software that I learned more about as I got certified in it, that I maybe realized that we really could benefit greatly, not just myself, but a lot of the, first responders, from a things from security to ease of use to all sorts of things that by putting it in the cloud, it would free up one less server we have to maintain internally, and it would free up my time to kind of really configure the program.
Yeah, I guess my question was mainly about the nature of it, because as we use it, because as I understand VPN, you have to have your traffic appear as though it's coming from somewhere else anyway. And I was just kind of wondering like where those somewhere else's are.
So that's a type of VPN. The VPN that we have essentially, the default, if you will, is it routes all the traffic back to our data center. So the biggest use case is ambulances, patrol vehicles, fire trucks. They need to access our 911 system that shows where the call's happening, who's responding, dispatcher notes as they come in. And you need that type of VPN to keep the connection, especially as you kind of go in and out of cell service. So it's not necessarily routing it to appear as if it's coming from somewhere else. But a small example would be we have an outside agency who, when they are on our VPN, because it routes all of the traffic to our data center, they can't use their local printer or various other devices because it's a full tunnel VPN and not split tunnel. So little things like that, we can make it so sometimes the VPN will time out, for example. So I can write a policy to essentially make it always on for the emergency vehicles. Makes, when folks are responding to a call, they don't have to worry about the VPN dropping. As long as there's cell service and power, it just stays connected. And like I said, I learned all sorts of things where you can sandbox suspicious items and, let people open emails without the worry of, opening something, malicious in any way. So things I know I can do. I just, there is not enough time of the day essentially while I'm managing the server that it lives on.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Any questions, Bill? Okay. Thanks very much, Dylan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Our next item, Dylan, we have questions for you on this. This is just continuing our discussion, the ordinance digitization options. So I think we heard before about Civic Plus and general code, and if we have questions for Dylan or John, we can ask them now, or we can make a motion to choose one or the other. My understanding is that they're fairly comparable. There isn't one that's like clearly superior to the other, right? For the most part.
I just want to mention in the packet, and I apologize, as the first example I gave, I think was maybe unintentionally confusing because it incorporated ordinances in Muni Docs, which, as I explained, was not really the use case. It just happened. The random example I found did that. But I provided some other examples in the packet, as well as a OneDrive presentation. I don't know if anyone was able to watch that or not, but a lot of different examples. To answer the previous question, you can categorize them by date, by type, however really you want. And then the other mention was general code, the other vendor, because I mentioned we only had the 5,000. In the current budget, if we wanted to go that route, they could essentially split it. So they would do the 5,000 up front and then the rest after in the new fiscal year, to cover the cost of their, I believe it was 7,900 project costs. Civic Plus, if you recall, waived that fee and just are charging the first year hosting fee. So as Mike mentioned, I really don't think there's a wrong answer. Just sort of how much the website integration is favored.
Civic Plus integrates with our website.
Correct.
General code would be like a link from our website to there.
Exactly.
Okay. Questions for Dylan on this one? Anyone feel strongly one way or the other? Yeah.
Forgive me if
Both would be an upgrade from what we have.
Yeah,
Same
no,
as well.
of course. My apologies if you've answered this
No,
already, but
not at all.
basically, could we start with Civic Plus with just the fiscal year 25, 5,000 that we have if we fund more in 26?
Yeah, the hosting fee is less than 5,000.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So either program.
You can start either
we can
now.
Start implementation in fiscal 25, and then the board, I don't think we've added any funding for this purpose for 26 yet. I think that would need to be added.
The funding for next year would be just the hosting fee.
Okay.
So,
Right?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with voting on anything on this tonight because we're listed as the continued discussion. We didn't warn it as a vote. I'd love to be able to have people that have interest out there in the general public be able to weigh in on this. So I'm not comfortable moving ahead. Either option doesn't bother me, but I'd like to be able to have some opinion from outside resources as well.
I'm happy to table this till our meeting on the 10th. I have an agenda meeting with John tomorrow. We can put it on. Anyone feel strongly the other way?
No, and I guess ultimately, because it's kind of a new program, we're discussing it, but it's not even necessarily within the financial, like, you want guidance from the board as to which program to choose. So it's like, it's not necessarily a requirement that the board make this decision, but the department is asking for our guidance. So, okay, otherwise we wouldn't necessarily have to make a vote on it. We could just choose to fund it and then
Instruct the town manager and the IT director to.
so that's an option. I will say I personally prefer the Civic Plus just because I like kind of keeping things under the same umbrella, but I don't have a.
I like Civic Plus as well, but I have no problem waiting until the 10th. This doesn't seem like it's a big hurry, and we can put it on the agenda as a final discussion and vote or something.
Warrant item.
Okay, anyone else questions on that item?
Or just a suggestion that maybe if it's in the agenda next week, to have it phrased as like I mean, I would look, if you were landing somewhere, it sounds like you're pretty neutral, but just to like phrase the recommended motion as like a go with whichever one you recommend. Based on what you've heard from the board too. Maybe we're leaning towards Civic Plus, it sounds like. So if you're comfortable with that, maybe phrase it in that way.
sure.
Would you like Dylan to once again appear, or has he done his duty by presenting and then being available for questions tonight?
No, I think
Yeah,
I think if we have any questions
We
before.
can certainly ask any
email us.
questions during the week that come up about this, and I didn't get a chance to look at that video in the packet, so I would, gives me a chance to do that as well. So.
Okay.
Okay, John, budget review wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Dylan.
Also, can I just say, it's very wonderful to see like all the department representation here. And so thank you all for being here. Try not to keep you too late.
Yes, this is kind of in the way of a summary of where we are now and what steps still need to be taken with regard to the budget. So forgive me for spending a few minutes talking about how we got to where we are today. First, of course, as has been the case in years past, the select board generated its own budgetary guidelines, which were promulgated to all the department heads, who then kept those in mind while they developed budgets and presented them to town manager and the finance director, who examined all of these budget proposals with the department heads one by one in detailed meetings. The town manager made some changes, and the fiscal year 26 budget was presented to the select board. After tonight's IT budget presentation, you have heard from every department head about their recent accomplishments, their plans for the future, and support for their budget proposals. The select board has asked many budget-related questions and received many detailed replies from town staff. The town manager and the finance director have provided the select board members with a list of budget corrections, some relatively minor changes to make the numbers just as accurate as possible to reflect what we learned during these first few presentations. And the department heads themselves provided lists of their reserve accounts. Department heads also presented a description of their quote unquote non-negotiable budget amounts per the request of one or more select board members. We've also been given a history of lot usage in the past and maybe some ideas for the future. And both the town manager and the finance director have presented you with a list of options to possibly consider as you go about the task in these next few sessions of finding ways to increase revenues and decrease expenses to arrive at a balanced budget for the future that the taxpayers can afford and hopefully will support at the polls. It strikes me that in the future, going forward, we hope to soon receive VLCT workers' comp and property and liability insurance figures, which can be plugged in. That will have an impact on where we stand. Maybe we can get some idea as to how the current budget is performing in these next couple of weeks as the first half of the fiscal year comes to a close. And we can learn more perhaps about where the unassigned fund balance stands. All that to say, we've accomplished a lot. You have now some tools in your tool belt, both from the finance director and myself, but also from each of the department heads. And as Kim points out, they're all here tonight. If you have specific questions or concerns about their budget proposals.
Questions? Lane?
Yeah, I think there's room in the budget. There's always room in the budget to make cuts. I'd like to see all the department heads try to take a whack at their own budgets and come back with a reduction before we start laying the axe to things ourselves. That would make more sense in my opinion. We could have like a 4% budget reduction for each budget that's presented. That would help us to whittle down our decisions on what needs to be axed voluntarily. Do that.
Yep.
It's funny that you say that, Manny, because that would have been a much better exercise for all of us to do than the exercise that we had to do for non-negotiable items.
Yeah, have
It was
that.
very time consuming, and for what I may think is non-negotiable, Scott Haussler may not think it's, speaking directly of Parks and Rec, may not, or he might not think it is. I mean, it's a little bit frustrating to hear that now because we put so much time and energy into that one part, and now to come back and to ask for it, I would certainly hope that we could have some more discussion before the board makes a decision.
Well, that's great, Gail, but this is a suggestion you actually wrote to John, is that you said to ask for a 3 or 5% budget reduction outside of required personnel increases.
That's correct, because that's what, it would have been a better.
So-
It would have been a better process at that point in time. And again, it goes back to what the board makes, the board and the public may think that something's non-negotiable, but you're not boots on the ground every day.
Well, I don't-
It's much easier for us to go through, and if you want us to cut 3%, we've done that in the past, and we've been very successful at it, and we can do it as a group, not individually, because we are a group and it is town-wide. So that's just my position.
I realize that, what you're saying, but when I look at this list of non-negotiable things that you print out, all right, it's a lot easier.
Mary,
I printed that
You
out.
printed
I
it?
took
Okay.
what information was
Okay, well,
there.
if we have this, I mean, I asked you for a copy I'll ask John for a copy of non-negotiable versus other expenditures. I
It
haven't
should
seen
have been in the board packet to see, correct?
where,
it's in the agenda.
is it, where,
Yeah.
okay. So, okay, so that being said, that's fine, but I mean, to me, it's always easier to ask department heads to make cuts than to have select board members start wielding the axe on things. Voluntarily making cuts is a lot easier than us wielding the axe, in my opinion.
Exactly, that's the point that I'm trying to make, that the request for the exercise for us to make a list of non-negotiable items.
Well, now that you have them, you can cut, you know where the potential cuts can free from. So it's helping not only us, but help you as well.
In a sense, you've already heard from the department heads about what they might cut if they were forced to.
And let's make the cuts and come back to us.
So Gail, are you saying that if we said, hey, can we get a look at revised numbers, it cuts it like 3%, that would be a group effort, we wouldn't ask each department head to make a 3% reduction necessarily in their
When I
area?
said, it would be much easier. We've
Okay.
all done it in the past for those of us who've been there for a few years. If the board usually says, when they give us their guidance, we don't want to see more than a 3% increase.
Mhm.
And we come back and we give you, with the exception of personnel, there are certain things that we can't control. Because if you were to ask for an overall 3% increase, no more than 3%, that means you're removing bodies, because that's people.
Yeah.
Doing it as a crew, we all work together, so there may be some areas that, you know, my department, I have a very small budget, so for you to ask me to take 3% out, I'm not gonna be mailing any tax bills to anybody, you know, it's pretty difficult, but if you look at some of the bigger departments, they may be able to find it.
So this is like a collaboration
It is a
between everyone
collaboration. We've
to
been-
reach a number.
Yeah, we've been in situations before where we've had a building have a major mechanical, we've all had to come together, we needed to come up with some money, and everybody had to find money in their budget, and just, was it easy? It wasn't, but we do work quite well as a group, and so.
Well, devil's
I'm getting a
advocate,
message that, two messages that people can't hear you, so I don't know if the microphone up there would be more.
a devil's advocate might argue that that's why you've been elected to your position, for you to make decisions about the budget, which you have to present to the voters.
So with the changes that have been made, as far as the errors that have been made, what is the final number we're looking at? We're no longer gonna get 24 million, 453. What are we looking at now? Do you have a revised number?
For raised by taxes, it's 20,000,669. Like the 24 million is including all the revenue and stuff.
Right. No, I understand that. But I'm trying to figure out what the final number is based on all the changes or all the, I guess.
So you would just deduct
Mistakes that were made.
27,000 from it. The net difference is 27,000.
That's simply making those corrections, the relatively minor corrections that we've identified through the process. It's not the
27,000.
tough decisions that the department heads have been contemplating.
So we're still looking at $24 million. There we go.
Quick question then, Kim, do we know what the tax rate increase is in this current budget?
So 11.18%.
The spending is 11.3%.
11.3%.
That thing I sent out to everybody. That spreadsheet.
We still have, last year, I know we paid down. Kim?
Can I ask a specific question around one of those corrected amounts? Just, what was the change in salaries in the planning department, 622?
Right there on the.
No, I know, yeah, I've got it. I was just curious at what it was for. It didn't
She
come up.
spoke about it in her presentation last week. It was a change in the position, the salary for her new position.
Oh, sorry, I don't remember that. So that it was budgeted in there, but just at the wrong amount.
Well, when we went through the classification of it, it bumped it out.
Wow.
Things like- Some of that was done
Oh, okay, sorry, that
before-
does,
Before the reclassification.
Yeah.
and then-
okay, I do remember that now. Oh, yeah, good idea.
Do I need to repeat that or?
No, well,
Okay,
not
okay.
for me. I don't know if the
Okay.
public can. I did get a note that we,
Someone refresh me what our taxes came out last year.
what our,
What our rate was last year.
Pretty high, seven
Seven
something.
something, yeah, 7 point, I wanna say.
you mean the
7.8
increase or the tax rate? You talking about the
That we set
increase,
tax rate that was set.
Increase in the tax rate.
increase in the tax rate?
So when I look at these numbers, what I think, just trying to find a way for us moving forward and working with the department heads and town manager as a whole, it's like there are a couple of things. Right now, it's 11.3, right? What is the number we would find acceptable to vote for? And how do we get there? What happens if we put another, last year we put $2 million the unassigned fund in to pay it down, you look at the local option tax, and essentially the idea is like, if we wanted to get from 11.3 to like 5, what does that look like? And when it, how much, what percentage of the cuts needs to come from the budgets presented to us? And how can the department heads work best together to try and figure something like that out?
Maybe again, in a collaborative process that Gail was identifying, or you could task the town manager and the finance director to try to reach that threshold of 5% while gleaning through the department head's own statements as to what is non-negotiable. There might be play in some of those larger departments
I just wanna
to
make sure
accomplish
that
this.
If we ask for something like that, that it's like productive, and we're looking at like, it's, I mean, just asking them to go cut whatever out of it, is one thing, but, we do have some potential other funding that can go to pay for stuff, and it's just like, what is something we would be comfortable voting yes for? Understanding, that it was, a big increase last year, we've been in a period of large increases, not always, through fault of our own, but just natural inflationary pressures on things, particularly like healthcare and stuff. What is something that we would be willing to present to the public and feel comfortable that they would pass? And ultimately, passing the budget is the most important.
So what do we have proposed right now to offset this tax increase? What do you have for funds available that we can put towards this? I mean, we haven't heard
What's the
anything.
unassigned balance and what's the.
Yeah, exactly.
the
What's
lot?
The unassigned fund balance, according to the audit, is less than it was this time last year, so it was like 2.4 million. So,
So what do we have total in our unassigned? Just 2 point, that's it, 2.4?
and what's 10% of the operating budget? So, I mean, we need to keep. How much is the I mean, let's keep it at the moment. We can figure out the amount, like whatever we want to keep in the unassigned fund, at least 10% of the operating budget, correct? So if it's 20 million, is that 200,000? 2 million, 2 million, 2 million, sorry.
So we're not gonna be able to-
Set the tax rate.
So we're not gonna be able to touch any of it.
So,
Gail, I think Gail's been talking in the neighborhood of 400 or 500 at the most, maybe.
which is still mind blowing to me because we haven't actually done that fund transfer for a number of years, yet the fund balance is not increasing, it's decreasing. And that was a question you're gonna answer later in the week, I think.
So when we get those numbers, it's helpful, right? To know how much we can possibly put towards it and what the lot would be and what kind of items we propose funding with the lot that are likely to pass, and we don't have the luxury of putting in as much from like the unassigned fund as we did last year, the more of the percent cuts is gonna have to come. Kim and I guess.
Oh, go ahead.
So as far as the unassigned fund goes, I know it's
It's just hard for me.
I know it's very confusing. Everybody needs to remember that it's the entire governmental funds. It's not just the general fund. And so, yes, it goes up sometimes and sometimes it goes down, but it takes into consideration the capital account. It takes, I mean, there's 8 or 9 different funds that go into that. So you're correct. We haven't, since I've been here, we have not officially made the transfer to cover the budget. So this year in 2025, we have 2 million that we've budgeted, which is taken into consideration for the balance that we currently have in the unassigned fund, which is 2.4 million. And before I move on to the next one, I just want to finish my thought that I would recommend as a finance director that you don't take more than 400 or 500,000 at this point in time, as the town manager noted. All of that information is in the audit, which was presented and accepted last week. As far as other funding opportunities, yes, you have the lot. You were given a list of some ideas that we collected as we were going through the budget presentations. That's a decision that you as a board need to make, what you want to put forward. And as soon as you choose out of there, that will be making reductions out of the budget. And then you have, there was a question about the opioid funding. Those have specific uses. If you see something in the budget that meets the criteria of that, then we can certainly pull that out. I provided the definition a few months ago, what can and can't be used for it. And then we recently received 30,000 for local economic impact funding, which can be used for anything except for FEMA related items. And so you have those options. We also have some reserves, do we want to, do you want to cut some of the purchases for things, or do you want to ask them to pay for it out of their reserves? It's very difficult for the town manager and us as staff to move forward if you don't start making some decisions on what you want to pull out, what you don't want to pull out, and how you want it to be funded. So the sooner that we can get that information and we have direction, we can start moving forward and providing some feedback.
Lanny, then Kim.
So the money that we had from ARPA that we didn't use, that we allocated to go into the general fund, what is the dollar amount on that?
I don't have that in front of me, and I do understand that at a recent meeting, you actually took some additional funding to fund a public works department. So that amount, whatever it was, is less than that now.
161, I think.
Yeah, so it's
Sounds
probably,
right.
161,000 we still have left.
Well, that's what it was before.
Yeah, I think there was 30 more added into that,
So-
or not lane project.
Okay. So
You
a
might have
couple,
130 or so that
Right.
was moved.
so a couple things that would be nice is to know, how much is there? I mean, it would be nice to know exactly the opioid settlement fund money. I would tend to think some of that stuff could be used for PD.
it has a specific use, Lanny. You just can't use it for operations of the police department. And
Right,
I
but for training?
I don't remember seeing too much in the police department's budget that it would be applicable for. And I certainly could have missed it, but if I seen it, we would have had the discussion about it.
So what about our community nurse? Is that something that funding can be used towards that?
It can't be used for paying for salaries.
Not salaries, but for, well,
Right,
I
so
guess-
as far as the community nurse goes, that position was originally budgeted to be a contracted service, but now it's an employee.
Right.
So, no, you can't use that.
not a lot of options here. Did you guys have a chance to look through the reserves?
Mhm. Yeah, well, yeah, I think I've gotten a little scattered now, I apologize, but I guess one thing, have either of you chiefs looked at anything that could be applicable in your budget that would work with the opioid settlement funds?
I have not yet.
Would you think about if there might be anything that you have currently budgeted that could?
Oh,
be
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean,
free
we
money's
can
always
look
good.
too, but I think you
Yeah.
guys would know better than we would. Is that a reasonable request?
Yeah, a lot of it's outreach related, and I know most of the outreach items we get are already free coming into us from the Department of Health that we're pass through for. So I don't know if there's a lot of offsets there, but I can work on it.
Okay. And then with I think also it would be helpful to identify, like I was only able to look at the email this afternoon with the reserve accounts, so I haven't thoroughly processed that and like compared it with the request. But I mean, I guess I would ask that we look at whatever vehicles are, whatever equipment is being requested in the fiscal 26 budget, will be looked at utilizing reserve funds and then potentially replenishing. So for example, if there's a $60,000 vehicle purchase and there's 120, again, I haven't looked at the specific amounts, but look at purchasing through reserves and then replenishing reserves with a lower amount for future purchases. I know we talked about how fire department has a fairly clear schedule of equipment, goals and funding and reserve. And so I think that the closer we can get to that for any department equipment in terms of funding sources for the next 5 to 10 years would be just really beneficial. So we're not, I mean, this is a little, I mean, definitely we'll look at it, but I feel like there's like any way to like spread out those costs. And then there was a reference in one of the finance directors notes about leasing rather than purchasing. If there are opportunities for any of the equipment that's being requested in the fiscal 26 budget, that if that is a way to look at cost reduction, I mean, that's not something I think that we're going to do the research on. But if there are options out there that I think looking at the equipment as one big piece in terms of, is there a lease option? Are there reserve options that we can still not drain reserves entirely, but utilize them and replenish as we go along? Those would be objectives I would be interested
Yeah,
in.
my thing, I mean, I'm more concerned about the percent, like the number, than I am about how we.
But how do we get there? I
it
mean, they
down.
want
But I mean,
some
they're
guidance
the
on how to get
experts
there.
on it. So I mean, I was wondering, one thing I was wondering, so we can, because we can sit here and talk all night, but is there a way forward to look at a budget? How much of a pain would it be for the meeting on the 17th, see a budget that's a 9% increase, a 6% increase, and like a 3%, or some number like that, before we start using funds to pay stuff down, right? Like if we just said, come back, show us what it looks like, if instead of 11, it's 9. What does it look like instead of 9, it's 6, etc. And
I
then
mean, 3
then
we
can
can't
kind
do
of-
because
well,
even
3
just salary increases.
I know,
right?
but I mean, I'm just kind of throwing those out as
Right.
numbers,
Right.
because we, you know, they're the experts in these particular areas, and I'm sure they'll look at all that. And when I vote on something, I mean, the bottom line is I'm more concerned. I don't want to vote in favor of an 11.3% increase. If it's a 6% and then you use some lot funding or something, it's not me, you know? So I mean, it's more about the bottom line, at least what I'm thinking about it. But Manny?
Yeah, ask the Director of Parks and Recreation. I'm looking at the reserves in Parks and Rec of $96,617. And it says we've got project name Parks Trucks Replacement and Gator Replacement is identified in budget. So that's being the funds that you had allocated is coming from the reserve funds.
If you look back to, think back to the presentation that I gave, I did identify that those 2 pieces of equipment are in the budget as an expense to identify the need for that equipment. We have reserve funds set aside that if you looked at purchasing them through the reserves, then we can do that. That would reduce our budget by close to that full reserve account. You also know that in the budget presentation, I did request for those reserves to be replenished too. Like the fire department, we have an amortization schedule as well with all of our equipment. Once that gets faulted or hiccups occur, we start falling behind. So that's my recommendation. And I'm going to take my department hat off and be a taxpayer because I am a taxpayer. The 9.63%, to me, that's not knowing what you want to cut. It's better for us to come back as so I'm just saying that, well, I guess I'm taking it as a department head then and a taxpayer. I prefer to see one amount to say this is the bottom line. I think it's easier for you guys to do your job when there's a dollar amount that you're looking at and allow the departments to look at ways that they can do the best they can to reach that dollar amount without disrupting service.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And it's easier for us and it'll be easier for you to make that decision because if you don't want to go over 5%, then let us go to work, try to figure it out.
Well, so if I may, based on the spreadsheet I did, I mean, 5%, that's $1.3 million. We got to find reduction. That's a significant amount of money just to get down to 5%.
Well, that's still not including, like that hasn't taken into account any of the other sources, the lot and
I
the,
realize that, but we shouldn't, when we look at like local option tax, uses of local option tax, we've been burnt by making suggestions of local option tax before. And
I have, my
that's,
suggestion is that we have the voters, if they want to use it to offset the tax rate. But I know that's been discussed before and hasn't been the ultimate decision.
we
but-
have to, you have to put it across to the voters what the actual uses are. That's the way the lot is
Well,
set
one
up.
option, it is an option to just ask them if they want to use it to offset the tax, the
No,
operating
we
budget.
can't do that. We have to ask
Yeah,
them
no, I
for
think we can.
individual, no, the way the lot is. set
As the
up.
current lot is used, you have to ask the voters specifically how to spend it.
Right,
But-
for each item.
But
No.
there's a new law in Montpelier that says if the select board wants, absent any charter discussion, you can go to the voters and recommend that they adopt a sales tax.
Well, that's separate.
No, that's
Right.
not, that's total
Yeah, that's what I'm
separate.
talking about.
No,
To the
we're
addition
total-
of a sales tax to the rooms and meals and alcohol.
separate item, John. We're talking about what we currently have for local option tax.
Oh, I
The
thought
way
you were
our-
talking about
The way our
selling the new
current,
one.
the way our
Sorry,
current
what?
local option tax reads
I agree.
is that we have to present
Yes,
to the
yes,
voters
I get it.
what the actual items are that we're asking them to pay for from the local option tax. We cannot just present it to them saying, we want to use X amount of dollars from lot to lower the taxes. We have to
No.
give them individual things.
Sorry, I misunderstood you. I thought you were talking about the sales tax.
No, the local, current law.
We can confirm that. I mean, I think asking the voters if they want to use it to reduce the operating budget is an option. So let's defer and come
Yeah,
back.
right.
But in any case, that 1.5 million to make a 5% reduction could be offset by, say, 500,000 from unassigned, 300,000-400,000, whatever it is from local option tax. Like, so that we're getting closer to less than $1 million.
I understand that, Kim, but what I'm saying is that I would prefer to see things taken out, that we have money from reserves or unassigned funds first, and then we start going after lot funds. Lot funds, assigning money to lot funds would be like a last thing to
100%.
save money.
But we still have to find those things.
Right, I
Gail,
understand.
do you have any thoughts, since if we came back in 2 weeks and saw a budget that's now a 6% increase? Is that something you guys can do? And do you think it would be a useful exercise? Or is it more useful that we just go through this, you know? I mean, I just like seeing what it looks like, you know, if we get it down, I think is a starting point, you
I think
know?
we've got the ingredients in the sense that we already have heard from the department heads as to what they think is critical to protect in their budgets. And from that list, Gail and I can make recommendations. However, if you prefer, you can hear more directly from the department heads and ask them to make cuts across the board.
Yeah, or Lori? Anyone has a
If I
comment
could
on
just
that?
add some clarification on how I went about doing the non-negotiable. And other departments may have approached it differently because what we all determine as non-negotiable. From my perspective, I understood that task to mean that the absolute that has to be done in order to meet statutory requirements and salary. But that doesn't mean that that would be a good decision to only do that, because it would severely impact program services, what our committees can do. And there's very little to negotiate within my department, but other departments might have a different perspective on that. But so when I heard that request, I was hearing it as, if we don't do this, we will not meet specific requirements. So I asked, for example, you can't take away my ability to print or mail things because those are statute requirements that I have. But that doesn't mean that the program costs that we have put in for each of the resilience program or for, for the various other things in the department for historic preservation or conservation, those were not put in unless they were absolutely necessary or dictated by statute. And it would be a change in our program services. So I just wanted, it may not be the way it was intended, but that's how I interpret it.
I just want to add my 2 cents on that as well, as that's fine.
Yep.
So yeah, I took the same approach as well. When asked for a non-negotiable budget, I was thinking, gotta leave the lights on, gotta have a truck start, gotta be able to go to a call, come back, put it back into service, those kind of things. I think if you, like Scott Hausler suggested, presented us a fixed amount or a percentage collaboratively that we don't want to do anything more than that, I think I would take a different look at my budget, thinking about strategies for the future, growth of the organization, supporting the employees, those kind of things. I would have taken a different look at it, made different suggestions to get there, because I'm going to prioritize what I think is best for the fire department in that kind of view. So that's just my kind of 2 cents on it.
So are you looking at, like, for us to come back to town manager and the finance director saying, give us a budget that only brings into this 5% increase? Is that what you're looking for?
My suggestion, if they can do it, is they come back to us with a budget that does that. They figure out how they want to try and achieve the savings as a whole, you know, and what does that mean in terms of equipment, leases, whatever, you know, they're sort of the experts on it. But then we get a new budget to look at, and it's like, all right, this is only a 5% or whatever the number is increase. Here's how we got there. What do you think? You know, just so we have something to look at. Otherwise, I feel like we're good at, you know, identifying what sort of what's important to keep in a budget, things like that. But at some point, we have to look at the bottom line. And
I just want to know if it's realistic, though, before we ask them to do it, if it's even a realistic.
That's what I asked. Is it just too onerous to do something like that for the 17th?
I've already presented approximately a 10% cut in our budget and a non-negotiable. You know, it's items we could live without this year, but you know, everything is like the trucks. There's $280,000 for trucks. If we don't buy them this year, I'll be asking for them again next year. Can we take a look at it a different way? Do we need to do cash and carry, or can we finance? That's the type of stuff we can start to take a look at for, you know, big equipment items like that. Because could you spread that $200,000 payment out over 5 years, so it would be smaller. So that would be something that, you know, could we do, you know, get those numbers within 2 weeks? We could try to take a look from that, but I did put that in, you know, as one of my items that could be taken out of the budget already. But with all of us, it's, you know, if you take this away, it's a service that's not going to get done. You know, sidewalks, if we don't have the $20,000 to do the sidewalks, the stretch between Route 5 and that area of the Bugby Center is not going to get done. So I did definitely try to keep in there, what does the services to the public that we need to have for our department. So
As I say, if you're gonna do a survey of the department heads, we need some time, Gail and I, to kind of collect and collate it into a budget to be presented to the board. So we would need this from the department heads significantly before the 17th.
Guess what gets me is that, you know, last year we had a pretty significant budget increase, and this year you came back with 11.3% budget increase. Yes, that we're not going to settle on that number. Okay, I don't think it was that high, the final number last year, but next year, if we don't, you know, next year, what's it going to be? Is it going to be 16, 17%? You know, I'm just concerned about the fact that we're seeing constantly increasing budgets that we have to, for lack of a better word, knock down to make it palatable to taxpayers. And I just don't see how it is that we're going to be able to replace our equipment, because if we don't do this this year, we're going to have to do it next year. And I mean, I don't want to see 11.3% tax increase, but and I'm certainly not the one to have the answers on how to get more money coming into the town. We need to grow the grand list, but I just don't know how we can continue to do this. I don't want this trend to continue of having these large increases brought before us year after year, and then not, you know, next year it grows that much higher.
Gail, Kim, Ida.
So just one point of clarification, the budget last year that was presented to you was almost bare bones. It was the select board that added all the additional stuff. So I just want to make sure that it's clear for everybody who's listening. It was not the department heads that brought an expensive budget. We brought a bare bones, which we were all exceptionally proud of. And then the select board sitting are the ones that increase it. So I just want to make sure that we're clear. And what happens with that is when you approve the budget, there are items that are in our budgets that are reoccurring. So they may not be a one-time thing. So you're going to carry that increase going forward. And whether it's funding a project that's a multi-year project, or it's taking on a new, whatever it may be, that it's reoccurring. So you're going to continue to see that expense. It's not going to go away. So I just want, in our defense, my entire team's defense, that we did what we were supposed to do.
Great job. I understand that, but just keep getting bigger and bigger.
Couple of things stepping back out, like one, I think there are still some revenue, like we don't, I had asked for, and we'll get this week, what the current year to date interest deposits is. I mean, that was a big one in 24. I think we budgeted something like $45,000 and it ended up being $488,000. And so like, if we're already over $100,000 in interest on deposits for fiscal year 25, I think we need to bump up fiscal year 26. I realize interest rates can change, but I'm curious of where that will land when we have that information.
I think the budget is significantly more aggressive on that than it was last year.
Yeah, it went up to 200,000 instead of 100,000, which was last year. So yeah, it would have to be for 2026. Yeah. So be curious to know that. I will say that, like, because this is like wrap up portion, another observation I want to make kind of like in the whole big picture of this process is when I spend a lot of time with our budget book, and we do have all the lines for those non-negotiables, right? There's like 15 lines per department for salaries and FICA and childcare tax and all those things. And then we get to contracted services or equipment, and it's all squeezed into a narrative. And I realize that there are ways in which if we had more specificity on a lot of those things, I think it would give anyone, member of the public or member of the board, just more ability to sort of understand year to year what those costs are, and looking at, what did this contracted service cost us in these years, and what is it costing us now, and when it's going up. So just kind of stepping back, I think there's still room for improvement in formatting. I know that it's an impossible task because it's a huge amount of information. I haven't spent that much time looking at how other towns present their budgets. Be curious to do some comparison for future, not for this year. But then there still are a number of little things that I had put in my follow things. I don't know if tonight is the night to do that or if there's another night. So for example, and most of them are increases. So I do think the board should consider supporting an additional 2.5% for the town manager's salary, because his is not in keeping with the 4% of the rest of the staff. It's one thing. If no encumbered funds are projected for fiscal 26 for select board training, I think we need to add something in there, because right now it's at 0, and whatever funds have been encumbered are anticipated to be used in fiscal 25. So there's two things that I hate to say I want to add.
Keep going.
Yeah. And yeah, and again, the question was like, when will we know more specifically about workers' comp fees? Will we know that before the end of 2024 fiscal year? I mean, calendar year? It's around the end of the year. So we'll know it before the budget is finalized, but could that be off by as much as say $10,000 or $20,000?
I received tentative numbers from BLCT last week, but it does not have the individual rates for each department for workman's comp. So I briefly spoke with the town manager about it today. And I had mentioned to him that one of the things that I would like to see happen is, as what we did with property and liability, is we just put it all on one line. It would be much easier for all of the departments, and it would be much easier for me as the finance director, being selfish. So that way I could go in right now and I could zero out everybody's department that has a 250, workman's comp in it, with the exception of enterprise funds, because those are separate, and then put in a line for the property and liability, and then for workman's comp. And based on what I heard from BLCT, unless something happens significantly between now and December 31st, that will be the numbers that we should be using.
Okay, so the ones that are in there are pretty darn close, if not.
There's, I don't want to.
Okay, I'm just thinking about ways in which like we could really like hone it. I mean, honestly, like even if it is some of these little ones that were like $2,000 at a time, like the more accurate we can get.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that we've been striving to do, which is, the list of small corrections that we have, but a little bit adds up after, you have enough of them.
For sure. I mean, what another potential, and I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but does IT salaries get distributed to enterprise funds? I mean, is that another way to, I find it complicated. I think it does make sense, but it's something to consider. I don't know how much of a difference it would make, but it might also knock like 15 or 20,000 out of the operating budget.
Well, Gail, I'd add her.
Yeah, I think Dylan could tell you that as a broken record, I keep telling him as the IT director that he should not be carrying the burden for any of our departments, that it should be spread out. And his department has been certainly doing a better job at it, but I could certainly support that and have a discussion with the town manager regarding it, because his position, simple, just like mine and the town managers, we're across the entire town. Certainly would want to include the public works director, because that would impact their budgets. But certainly that would be a way to make a change there.
So I was just going back to sort of trying to understand what a next step might look like, and what a request could look like. And yeah, the idea of like 6% sounding like a number that could be more of a comfortable level of increase. I think, I don't know, it sounds like there's room for improvement in terms of how like these types of requests come about. And I guess for me as a new person to this process, like understanding what the format, like hearing your feedback, Gail, about what is more challenging versus like more reasonable in terms of us collaborating with you all to reach like a reduction. It's helpful to hear that the sort of like non-negotiable framework. I mean, I didn't find that for myself. It was a little bit of backwards. Okay, these are non-negotiable. So what does that mean in terms of what could be? It was like hard for me to absorb in that format. So it's helpful to hear what is more useful. It sounds like where Mike, you're at, like just sort of offering a number like 6%. And then seeing if you can come back to us with that makes sense to me. That sounds like a really simplified things, but then I'm also hearing that there's other things that we really need to think about. So like, for example, the spreadsheet that Lanny put together, 6% would be around 1.1 million reduction. However, we have to consider the couple other sources like the lot and the what's the other one? The unassigned funds. Yeah, so that could potentially be around
ARPA funds.
Right. So this could be around like 800,000 or 900,000, like up to $1 million. So I guess my question sort of is like, is there a percentage that we want to request in terms of this like revised budget, or is there like an approximate amount of cuts? Like, is it more like, oh, can you show us what a budget looks like cutting $500,000 out overall? If we're assuming that we can kind of supplement to get to around that 6% number with some of these other sources. Is that another approach? And then I guess another question is hearing about last year, how you all presented a bare bones budget, the select board added a number of things. I've heard Kim suggest 2 things that would be increases. Are there other things that are gonna like come out of the woodwork that the select board is gonna bring up? Like, it sounds like there was kind of a lot last year. So I'm just curious if that's something that like, I'm trying to factor in too.
We will need to factor in an amount for debt service for the Fairview Terrace project.
Right.
But I'm in talks now with legal counsel as to how much of the money we should actually borrow versus maybe deferring some of the other borrowing within that 4.1 million to later fiscal years, just because of the fact that it might take us a while to secure easements and what have you to move forward with actual construction. So I'm trying to get a better timetable on how much borrowing and when, so we'll know what kind of debt service payments we'll need to fold into the budget.
Right. Yeah, it does. It seems to me like this, if we're gonna make a big request of the staff to kind of come up with a revision, the more specific the request can be, the better. However, there are still these several kind of more vague variables.
And we need to know that not all departments are created equal. Not all departments have any real, other than functional operating funds that they can manipulate versus other larger departments that might have some more latitude to make some prioritizations.
Right,
So we
that's
shouldn't
partially-
necessarily ask everyone to contribute the same percentage amount in
No,
reductions, right?
yeah, that's partially why I was wondering if like a dollar amount might be easier to manage. Like if we said, for example, like we need to cut $500,000 or $600,000, department heads, can you like work together to reach that collaboratively? Not everyone's gonna cut the same dollar amount,
Right.
but you know, bigger departments can cut a couple 100,000, smaller can cut a couple, you know, tens of thousands. I don't know.
I still think our best move to make this productive is to ask that on the 17th, they come back and show us a budget that's a whatever percent increase and let them skin it, you know? We don't have to make every little decision of the experts. That's my thought. Hey,
Yeah, so when I actually asked John about a breakdown of mandatory spending versus requested spending, I actually had asked about description and dollar amount for the items that are non-mandatory versus the mandatory items. And the reason I did that is that it's a lot easier for us up here to see the non-mandatory items, the ones that we can actually, you know, try to go after and see if there's some cost reductions available. You guys spend a lot more time in your budgets than we do. And you know, I mean, having all the things that are mandatory presented to us are great, okay? But then we gotta still go back through all the budgets again and figure out all the things that we can shop that are, you know, non-mandatory. That's why I was hoping it'd be the non-mandatory things that I asked about. I'm not sure where that got lost in translation.
It didn't get lost, Lanny. I presented your email to Gail and I said, Gail, what do you think is the best way to present this to the staff to get a consistent answer across the board from them? And that was her recommended language.
As far as mandatory items versus the non-mandatory. So now, okay, so that's different. But it does make it harder for us that are not as versed in the budget.
I wasn't trying to make it harder for anybody.
No, we just thought it makes it more difficult to go through that stuff, because each and every one of us knows that the mandatory stuff is gonna be spent, and nobody wants to have to say no. But there's the other things that we haven't even discussed here is, you know, the, not appropriations, but libraries, cemeteries.
Well, they're currently in the operating budget, so that's all. that's part
Right,
of
but
it.
those are, yeah. So,
I still think, and I think I had mentioned the same thing I was saying as we asked them to come back with a number on the 17th. We can do it by dollar amounts, but they could tell us what they prefer or a percentage. And they tell us and they say, it could look like this, look like this. Here's a decision you have to make. I mean, there are decisions we do have to make policy wise. You know, if they want to figure out a way to save 50,000 by moving money around, doing this and that, like, yeah, that's fine. You know, if their ultimate decisions, like, do we fund this project or not? that's a decision for us, and I think it's fair for them to put that back on us. But I don't know that, you know, having another session like this on the 17th where we're just like, how about this, how about that?
Right.
Get this anywhere, we gotta see something, you know, and then we can look at like the math, how do we get there? Here's how we cut this amount, and I think we all understand that the departments have different budgets, you know, some are bigger, some are smaller. We're not expecting a department with a smaller budget to make, you know, the same dollar amount decrease or good percentage amount as I think other ones, but I still think that's the best move going forward. and I
Well, it's good
hope
for
we
all the
can
department heads to hear
agree on
from
that.
you all on that. That's good.
Kim?
I know you've been away, so I can't imagine there's been an opportunity for this, but the idea to follow up with the school district about their facilities manager and if there's any place
I have not,
there.
no.
Because I have a feeling that new position might be one that is potentially
Oh,
deferrable.
I'm not
No.
married to it for this year.
Yeah.
I recognize reality like the next guy.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, yeah, I want all kinds of
Yes.
more staff. Anyway, I think that if there's any like just understanding of any possible path in that direction by the 17th or something, I think that would be really helpful. I'd be curious to know where the school district is in their budgeting process too.
So can we come onto the same page with Mike and say that we're looking at a certain percentage versus just going about this nickel and diming? Because I think that he's right when he says to give them how much we want to cut by and then have them figure out where to make the cuts.
Yeah, that's just a starting point. We might present you with what a 6% increase on expenses looks like, and you might choose to cut more or cut less, but that'll at least get us into the right neighborhood.
Yeah, I feel like seeing something would be better for us.
Can I make a
Yeah,
make a
go ahead.
proposal to cut 1.5 million?
No.
Let's hear what Kim has to say, and then we'll hear from Scott or whoever wants to go first, just what your general, whatever, you got.
I know you're trying to arrive at a decision on a number versus a percentage, and I guess I'm fine either way. The question for me would be, are you gonna consider whatever transfer from the unassigned fund in that consideration?
Wait, so may I? Because
Sure.
so I think we give a dollar amount, maybe it's 6, 7, 800,000 or something like that. But within that, there's also the potential for, if you're gonna cut something out of that operating budget and you have reserves to pay for, you know, so say maybe this, you know, $80,000 piece of equipment, you're gonna take out of the operating budget, you're gonna pay for it with reserves, but you're gonna add $20,000 into it, so it's a net reduction in 60,000, right? Like, is that that's an option that equipment could still be purchased, but just not through the general fund? Even if it just reduces it and some still gets transferred into reserves? Anyway, I think that could be part of the equation.
Sure.
I don't think we should ask them to cut $1.5 million. I think we should say something around 6, 7, or 800,000.
Gail, or
knowing
anyone,
that we have
do
some
you
other
have a
resources.
preference that if this request is made to you, that it's a dollar amount or a percent, or does it not really matter too much?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because there's uncertainty around some of these things that are gonna compensate, I think I'd be asking for more than it's needed if we make it a percent, like 6%, because we don't know exactly how much we have an idea of how much we're gonna be able to offset with some of the other sources. So yeah, I think I agree that for me to wrap my head around it, it makes sense to request a dollar amount in the ballpark of 600,000 to 800,000.
That's
As a
not even
reduction.
gonna get you down to that's still gonna be a 7% increase, so.
No, it's not, Lindy, because you have to consider what we're gonna transfer from.
Well,
the
I know,
unassigned
but
fund.
but
So it's gonna
that's-
add up to 1
Well,
point.
hopefully those
X
numbers will
million.
come back into it to say that we're gonna get, so that if those numbers came back into it, that would mean that it would fall into it, a lower percentage increase. That's.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
But
what I'm
that's on
getting at
us,
though. is
that's
to-
not for staff to do. So if we say staff, give us a budget that's $600 less.
Done.
Done.
So moved.
$600,000 less than what has been presented. And then we know that we have some resources in terms to offset that, the rest of the operating with local option tax, with ARPA, with unassigned fund. That the three of those together will be upwards of $1 million or maybe a little over $1 million.
Anyone got a number they want to throw out?
I'm comfortable with $800,000.
I mean,
We can ask them to do it, yeah, I mean.
I was gonna go by percent.
I would love to go by percent, but it seems like nobody wants to go by percent.
Yeah.
So whatever you give us for a number, I guess I would just like to hear from the board that we're not gonna solve all this on the 17th.
Right.
No, I understand.
Like, so we have the 18th, 19th. If everybody's willing, we're gonna do the homework again, and as long as the board comes prepared to have the discussion, the hard discussions, then that's great. But if we're not gonna have dialogue and everybody's gonna be prepared to do it, then it's really a wasted
No,
exercise
we
for
know this is a
everybody.
big ask at this point, and, you know, we're committed, we're meeting, the 10th, we're not gonna bother with, so the 17th and the 19th, we have more days. You know, if we have to add meetings here and there, you know.
We have those
We'll do it,
dates.
you know. But we wanna make sure we're like working with you on this, you know, and this feels like collaborative, and, you know, I think you guys did a great job, and it's amazing that, you know, you're able to give us something even on the 17th that looks like we're cutting some money. You know, it's been a tough couple of years in terms of these increases, and we understand, and we know a lot of this stuff is out of our control, but I do think the best we can do to try and make this year's budget a little easier on the wallet for people would be appreciated, you know, so. Yeah.
Do we know, and Lanny, I'm not looking at your worksheet, maybe it's in there, does that do the thing where it tells you like with the existing numbers, what the property tax is on a $250,000 house?
I did not calculate that.
We don't have any of that yet, do we? Like, do you have any?
We don't have the.
It's always such a like, it's just such a really lay person's way to look at the budget. So at any point, if you have like a worksheet or something that we can use, or if you can provide with like what we're starting with. So say like right now, if we say, you know, like with the Parks Department, like it was so great, right? Having the what the Parks Department costs to a home property with 250,000, whatever it was, 300,000, $500,000 house. Like it's just it's a way to really like just conceptualize what we're talking about. Cause I mean, I look at this budget and I'm like, I want to know how much this is going to cost. I want everything in this budget. And so what would this cost the taxpayer? Like,
Well, it was actually provided in the original draft that the town manager provided. It showed what we had for an increase last year and what we have this year.
okay, so like when we
it's
first got the
fair-
budget book?
Correct. It's
go back and
fairly simple to do.
Okay.
I think one of the things that I caution you on is that normally we don't do like the playing with the numbers until like the very
Yeah.
last meeting. And I have we'll continue on with the budget corrections list that we have there. And then as you add and subtract things, you're gonna say, now what's the tax rate? And now
Right.
what's the tax
No, I
rate?
know.
And there's a lot of room for error that happens during that time frame. So certainly when we come back together on the 17th, I can give you another update on what the actual tax rate is and what the impact is for a $250,000 home.
It'd be nice to know just like what we're starting with and then. what
Yeah,
we
so I have to
get.
refer back to the
Okay,
original.
look, was that a worksheet that we can just plug in new numbers
Oh.
in?
It
Look at
was a
and-
PDF.
You
Okay.
gave us but you gave us an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, I
Of the whole
did.
budget.
Yeah, I'm looking for it and I can't find it.
Yeah, I gave it last year, but we
I
do have
can't.
some new board
No,
members.
we got it this
so-
year too.
Oh, I did send
We
it
got
to
the
you this year
26
too?
one. I can
Oh,
forward
okay.
it to you.
Can you please? I would appreciate that.
So we do an updated budget proposal on the 17th.
Right,
cutting
it sounds like maybe Gail and I,
As much as we can get towards it.
Gail and I
Cutting
can-
800, is that the number
I-
we decided? Let's just choose a number. 4 people say a number.
Wait a minute. So when we say that number though, that's the problem that I'm having a disconnect in, is that we're saying we want them to come up with that out of their budgets, regardless of what we're gonna use the other funds for, or we're gonna say down to that 800, including what we're gonna use other funds for.
No, not
Because
including.
that's still a
not gonna
considerable
say-
wallop to the taxpayers.
We're asking them to look where they can take anything out of their budget that will add up to $600,000 in my opinion. And then that's gonna do that, and then after the fact, we apply those other resources.
But those other resources, ballpark, those are resources are gonna give us to what?
About a little over $1 million, including ARPA.
So
Nothing about this exercise is final.
No.
This is just getting us into the neighborhood, Lenny.
I completely understand that, but I'm trying to understand where we're talking about. A is gonna give us, we want them to take $800,000 off of their budgets. Or B, we're gonna take $800,000, but that includes putting that money that we've got, gonna use from ARPA and all these other.
No,
unexpended
I'm
funds.
interpreting it as
So-
just spending reduction.
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand, all right? So,
And I think ideally Gail and I would be given the latitude by the board to lay it out for the department heads as to what we need from them. And by when we need it, because we're gonna need it before the 17th. So Gail and I can massage it into something we can present to you.
I still say, I'm happy with $750,000. I said 8 before, so.
Just to be clear here, what I heard earlier in the meeting was that we could use $400,000 or $500,000 of unassigned funds potentially. So let's say 450, we'll split the difference. You know, it seems like we have in our possibly negotiable items on the spreadsheet here, maybe a $350,000 lot item. So if we say that, that's $800,000, and I'm not sure how much ARPA.
About
120.
100. So like, you know, that's 900,000, something like this. So, you know, if we add to that 600,000, that's your 1.5 million that you said earlier.
But
Total
again,
cuts.
you're counting on ARPA, not ARPA, you're counting on lot. And you cannot put all your eggs in the basket on lot, and that's.
That's right. That's why I suggest we put something to the voters that they are likely to approve, something that people tend to really like.
For a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I still want clarification on what Kim, your.
Yeah, I'm
thought
gonna
is.
have to email. I couldn't find it by searching,
Okay.
so I'm gonna ask ELCT tomorrow.
Yeah, because I mean, I think something that the voters will definitely really like is if we say, do you want to use lot to offset the tax rate?
Yeah.
Which I know we can do with the sales tax.
Yeah, but can we use it for what we have right
I
now?
think
Yeah.
we can, but we'll.
Yeah, yeah.
It's 700,000.
Yeah,
Just
if it was
searching for a
6%.
number we can all agree on so we can move on.
Or the
let
majority
them
of us
go.
agree on.
Or
yeah,
majority.
frankly. Yeah.
700,000, but
Going
taking
once.
into account a 4% increase for John's salary.
Or, yeah, total of 4%.
A total
Well,
of
they'll have
4%.
to-
2.5%.
Additional
To make
10.5.
No, additional, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
yeah, to make it, I don't know, I'm just saying, are we gonna have to add these increases that Kim is proposing after the fact, or are we gonna ask them to add it
Yeah,
as they
We
make their
decide-
cuts?
We decide on that.
Yeah.
It's extremely uncomfortable sitting up here and talking about the town manager's salary.
Yes, I agree with you.
Well, this is
Okay.
our job, so.
I realize that, but I mean, that's,
Fine.
it's
Okay.
extremely
Okay, so that's gonna
difficult.
come later,
Yeah.
the increases that we make.
I still think we just need to see something to make any positive progress on doing this,
Yeah.
you know? And if we want to do it in terms of a number, it sounded like 700. I support at least 4.
I'm okay with 700.
So I think that would be the directive to the department heads, and we'll get back on the 17th, and then we'll have some work that we have to do. Forward. So, thanks, everybody. And
Thank you for coming and all the work you've done.
Yes.
Just amazing.
all right,
More ahead of you.
we don't have a consent agenda, so I'll take a motion to
Wait
adjourn.
a minute, before we do that though, I mean, we need to seriously consider putting before the voters a 1%
Yeah, I know.
total sales tax. And where are we gonna be able to, when are we gonna have the
We
opportunity to
We can
discuss
just put it
that?
on the ballot.
Well, you need to discuss that.
And
Yeah.
you need to adopt a resolution recommending that the voters approve it.
Yes, if that's something we want to move forward.
And it has to be done by mid-January at the latest.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that at our agenda meeting. I think we've all discussed it. I think there's a majority of the support of the board to put something like that to the voters.
Work with JD.
market it better.
Good.
this time.
Right, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's been discussed too,
All
that
right,
like we can't
And with-
advocate for, you know, like individually, we can advocate for stuff, but the town can basically just make as much information available and
That's all
not
I
say
mean.
like, you should vote for this.
With
Yeah,
a,
I
with a
just need to-
unanimous, consistent support of every single select board member,
Right,
it could hopefully pass.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Mary, all right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned.
So.
Say first.